Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
We'd now like to watch a clip of Neil's work.
Great. A documentary called Home is Where You Find It, and it was directed by a young man who was then 16 years old.
My name is Alcides Soares. I made this film. I am 16 and I am an orphan. My father and my mother died of AIDS. I have a younger sister who lives nearby, and I have a little brother. I don't know where he is. My dream is to find my brother. I am lucky to have Vovó. She took me in after everything happened. I cook and I clean and I push her to church every day. And she gave me a place to live. It's a mile and a half to church. Some photographers from America came to Reencontro. They gave us cameras and they taught us how to take photographs of our lives. My friends took all of these pictures. I don't like to tell anyone that I'm just an AIDS orphan. People think that all AIDS orphans are HIV positive. People, they discriminate against you. Not all orphans have someone to live with, to take care of them. But that's what we all want. Some live in shacks. Some live on garbage dumps.
Você me contou que tens um irmão fora, que está contigo, já há muito que ele não lhe vejo e não sabe onde e que estado é que está. Então eu também comecei a me sentir, mas como não tenho nada a fazer, não tenho caminho que eu puder dizer que vai lá buscar a ele para vir viver conosco, porque nem sei como, está longe, está fora de que nem sabe, você seja de que não sabe onde está, não sabe se está em Zambésia, não sabe se está em Beira. Então as coisas ficou assim.
É assim, a Reencontro há de me ajudar. Estão para telefonar para tio Nando, há de me ajudar. Estão para obter uma informação através do tio Nando, para saberem onde ele está, se está em Zambésia ou está na Beira, para depois eles já de me oferecer um dinheiro para ele levar, um dinheiro suficiente para 2 pessoas já volta.
Agradecia, então, se for assim, eu também agradecia. Para estar perto dele, não é?
that's only 4 minutes of about a 28-minute film of Alcice's journey to find a family after his parents died of AIDS. And what you didn't see in this film is that he hadn't seen his brother in 10 years because they were separated, and he ends up finding his brother, and the whole family comes back to, and his sister, who lives someplace else, comes back together. And then because of the internet now, we can keep people updated. So now Alcice is doing a post-bac graduate year at Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts to get his skills sort of really polished, and he's going to go this coming summer to what's called the African Leadership Academy, which is sort of the preeminent school in Johannesburg, and then hopefully apply. He wants to be a filmmaker, and this was in 60 film festivals, and he thinks it's like, oh, I just make a film and I get it into festivals. And it was disqualified, actually. It was on the short list for the Academy Awards, and it was disqualified because the NGO that is distributing the film put it on the internet, and there's a rule that you can only have 10% of the film on the internet, and we didn't know that, and so it got disqualified. But it was okay because it allowed Alcice to tell his story in a way that was profound. And when I talk to students and I say, that there are 20 million AIDS orphans in Africa, and then I ask them what they're thinking about, their minds go blank because it's so hard for us to really picture 20 million. But when you see this whole film, you'll never forget the story of this one young man. And not every story certainly of an orphan is like this, but there are a lot of similarities, and you will keep it in your head and your heart after that. So there's something about the story more than the data and the hard numbers that those things live inside us, I think. All the photographs you saw were taken by other kids who were orphans. We taught 18 kids how to shoot, and then we taught Alcice how to shoot with a movie camera. So we incorporated all of the kids' photographs into this film. And so you just saw, at the beginning, you saw a lot of photographs, and at the end, you saw everyone holding and touching their parents who had passed away.
Mm. So out of all the stories that sort of you came across while you were there, how did you end up selecting this particular story? And I assume that you didn't know whether or not he would find his brother.
Right. That's the fun of making a documentary. You never know where it's going to take you. But we selected Alcice because I had a gut feeling that he was a great storyteller, and fortunately he was, and he took to the camera immediately. It was so interesting. The way I selected him, because we were going to choose one of the kids to make the film and really teach him how to shoot. He brought artwork with him, his drawings, and he really had this interesting way of depicting the world. I'll never forget, he had drawn these pots that they had used to collect water, and the pots were crying. And I said, why are these pots crying and this crockery crying? And he said, well, because they're empty. And so I said, well, he has some artistic vision right there. And he was so articulate that I thought that he would make a great filmmaker, possibly. And he spoke Portuguese in this film. Now he speaks fluent English. It's just, he's an incredible young guy now. And we just had this kind of rapport. I'm sure you felt that too when you've made your films, that you kind of know. So much is going by gut and getting the story. But he also had a way of articulating his story, and he was fearless. So, of course, we created a monster because now he's just made a new film that's on the internet about Deerfield, and he's always like now directing everyone. You stand here, turn the lights, do this, do that. So we've really taught him how, but it was a feeling. But he did come with amazing stories. So I felt like a kindred spirit because I see myself as, I've been very fortunate to be a storyteller. So I kind of glom on to people who tell stories.
Wonderful. We are now going to see a clip from one of John's recent films called Snowmen.
So I'll just set it up for you real quick. Snowmen's about 4 fifth-grade boys that want to matter. They want to do something with their lives that will make a difference. And in their minds, like me when I was in the 5th grade, you don't matter unless your name's in the book, the Guinness Book of World Records. And of course, things go awry in the course of human events, and they don't get into the record book. And this is a scene where all is lost. They've been through this journey. They failed miserably, and now they're kind of trying to figure out. They've been opposed by bullies, opposed by the community. They lied to everybody, and now they're trying to figure out where do they go from here. So that's Snowmen.
You should learn how to do this yourself.
They're too loose when I do it. I don't think we should skate today. Everything's melting.
Park always melts first. Lake ice is way thicker. Right, Billy?
So, Billy, your hair gonna go back now?
Guess so. You should grow a mohawk. Or go, like, really long hair. No, wait, mohawk, yeah. And then dye it purple, and go to all these funky parties.
Lucas, watch out!
Get away from him!
Back off or I'll cut him. How'd you like that, Lucas? How about a closer shave than Billy?
Leave him alone, Jason. He didn't even want to fight you.
But he's such a chicken. I can't stand him.
You're the chicken. Only reason you pick on him is because he doesn't fight back.
Come on, why don't you fight us?
No. Back off, Howard. Just me. Just fight me. Or are you too chicken? Were you crying?
Any last words, Kirkfield?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I threw those snowballs at you. Now we took over your stupid hill. I'm sorry I always make fun of you failing 3 times. Well, maybe you're just a jerk because nobody gives you a chance to be anything else.
I failed 1 time. You're still gonna die, you know.
I'm ready. And then I couldn't hold my breath anymore, and I breathed icy water, and I knew that was it. I was gonna die. It didn't matter that I wasn't in the record books. That didn't even cross my mind. All I could think about was missing my friends and family. And them missing me. It's funny how clear everything is when it's too late.
DVDs are available in the lobby if you want to see the ending of that film.
What is it called again?
That's Snowmen. Snowmen.
So tell us about what attracted you to this story and why this was a story that you wanted to tell.
I guess, like I said before, for every young boy in my neighborhood growing up, it was about being famous or getting your name in the record book or somehow having some great achievement, making a difference in the world, mattering and being remembered. Well, you know, what are you going to be remembered for? And I love that about kids and wanting to be famous. And yet what I've learned in my own life coming out here to Los Angeles from Chicago to be rich and famous and a movie star and banging your head against the wall, that the message of this film really, in reading it, is not what you do so much in life as how you do it. And that's what these boys learn. And for any moms or people, little brothers, and he does survive. He starts this movie by saying, "This is the year that I die." And you're kind of trying to figure out, this doesn't sound like a kid's film, you know, it sounds like Air Bud or Snow Buddies or something, but it's got a real message, it's got teeth to it. And that's what attracted me to it, was it's a little bit more like a Stand By Me than Beverly Hills Chihuahua. And it makes you think, and it gives you opportunity to talk with your children and with others about what's really important in life, and how would you know, we're all men of snow. We're here for a moment and then we're gone. And what do we leave? A puddle of water, a stain? What do we do that makes a difference? How do we, what's going to last? And that's, I'm interested in stories about legacy.
Well, it's interesting that these films on their face seemingly could not be more different, but yet they are so very similar in that both films are about a desire for meaning, a quest for meaning, and the importance and the role that memory plays, and being remembered somehow in some way, that we take from the great stories, the classic stories, the stories that live in our own hearts and in our own memories. And if you could speak to that just for a minute.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, we have a device, and obviously what Dr. Bears produced is a doc, and this was a narrative, but we use a device in our film where the kids document, because of YouTube now, their exploits and all their attempts to become famous. And then they go immediately to YouTube to see how many visitors they have, and you know, wow, 16 hits. Yeah, but we just watched it 10 times ourselves. Yeah. And I watched it 3 times at home. Me too. So it's a little bit like, gosh, how do we stand out? And it was at university, really, that I had a sort of, if I come out of school after 4 years and don't know what I believe, it will be a waste. I may learn everything, but if I don't know really what's important to me, and that's kind of what this film, I hope, communicates. It's funny when you go about making a project, you always think you're going to do something good for the world, or you have a message you want to share, and invariably the world and the story ends up ministering more to you and speaking more truth to you and making you realize, gosh, it's really not about me making a great movie. It's how I treated people. It's even speaking today and kind of sharing my journey. It's really about how I do things as much as what I do. I don't know if there's some overlap there with you, Neil, in terms of what you, or why you embarked on your project, but.
Well, for similar reasons, to tell, actually, not for me to tell Alcicha's story, but for him to tell his story. So we gave cameras, as was said earlier, to mothers the first year in Cape Town, South Africa, who had HIV, and taught them how to shoot, and they disclosed their status, being HIV positive, through their photographs. So for the first time, they were empowered. And there's something very empowering about telling one's own story. And if you think yourselves, anytime you've looked through the lens of a camera, be it a still camera or a movie camera, you see the world in a different way. It makes you focus. And you have to select and make choices. So I'm very interested in the choices that we make, but how do we tell stories that resonate for others? And I find that if we tell honest stories, we don't have to be orphans, or we don't have to live in Mozambique or South Africa, but we bring our own humanity, and we may know people with similar circumstances, but there's something about bringing the template of our own lives to a story that connects us. So I was very interested in giving cameras to these kids, and was very moved just by sort of the simple story of what makes a family, and what do you do when you have no family, when you have no parents anymore, and you're a kid, and there's no foster care or orphanages in most of Africa still. So what do you do? And the way that he was able to form a family with Vavo, you saw a woman who needed him. And so in exchange for a place to live, he wheeled her to church every day, and they became family. And she actually just passed away a few months ago, but he lived with her for about 4 or 5 years, and his brother did as well. So I'm always looking at stories that kind of can break down barriers in the way that we may see things traditionally. So a traditional family just doesn't exist for Alcich, or for many kids, many millions of kids. And so how can a story take us there? How can a story help us understand and empathize with that? And maybe we'll want to do something, but at least we can connect with our own humanity. And as I said before, if I gave you lots of facts and figures, that won't do it. But a story will, and you'll be emotionally moved in a way. And I'm really interested in that for research I'm doing now for a book I'm writing about storytelling. And there's some really interesting research that says that the neurobiology of storytelling is such that our brains are wired to tell stories. So all of you think of all the stories you've told today to your friends, to your family, to your professors, to colleagues. And then usually when I teach, I ask students to raise their hands if they haven't told a story. And the only ones who do are the ones who just came right from waking up, that they didn't tell a story. But we all are story-driven creatures, and we parse our lives by telling stories, and we keep track of our lives by telling stories. And if you know anyone who has Alzheimer's, they're not able to be story-driven. They've lost their capacity to tell stories. So for me, storytelling is the basic element of what makes us human. It's so that way that we share our lives with each other and keep track of our lives. And so there's really interesting research that shows that if you give people data, they're not really drawn to that, and they don't kind of connect to it, but they really connect with stories that just have one or two main characters. And so there's an op-ed writer for the New York Times named Nick Kristof, and he always writes, because he and I are influenced by the same researcher from the University of Oregon, he always writes about one or two people. And people are really connect. And maybe then he'll give the data at the end, but he doesn't say 3.5 million kids have HIV in Africa and only 10% get treated. He'll tell the story of one person, and then that resonates, and people really respond. And so I found that really quite compelling, that there's something just basic about humanity, and stories are the way we do it, be it through oral tradition, through the Bible, through movies, through novels. They're all stories, and we remember them because we relate to them.
And both stories are really have a lot to do with transformation and how people are redeemed and how people redeem each other. And I was wondering, John, if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of the story that you told.
Well, Neil used the word empowering a couple times, and that's what I love about what we get to do as filmmakers, as artists, as writers, and also as producers, is the idea of empowering others to tell their stories. And one of the reasons we founded Empower, our company, was Steve McAbee, my business partner, was at Icon 14 years. He did most of Mel Gibson's films that Mel directed, including The Passion. Steve picked a very strategic time to leave, because Mel had a little bit of a meltdown. That can be an understatement. Steve wanted to use his opportunity to set up a new platform to allow, like this story that we shared here in Snowmen is based on true events story about a young man who grew up in Winnipeg, Canada. All these events in the story happened to him in one way, shape, or form or another, but it had a very unhappy ending in real life. And he wanted to redeem that story and share that story with the families that it happened to, because in real life a little boy did lose his life. He didn't like that ending. And this story is a story chock full of hope, and when we talk about redemption, I think of redemption as buying back or redeeming, whether you be turning in a can for a nickel or something. You're buying back, you're repossessing, you're recovering something that's been lost, perhaps. And for Rob Curbison, who wrote this, it was a childhood, it was a moment of innocence that was lost. And how do I recover? And by telling this story, he was able to not only empower others, the audience, to make positive change, because he speaks a message of what are you doing with your life that does matter? What will last? How are you? Is it all about you? Is life and earning a living something that we just accumulate, or is life what we give away, you know? And I like that sort of contrast that we are snowmen here for a moment. What will stand the test of time? Well, for us, for me, it's relationship. Being in relationship with others. The time that you're here at university. People don't remember what my grades were, what my transcripts were, what plays I was in. They remember our friendship, some good times, some tough times, some difficult times, some emotional times, some loss. These are the stories that I want to share. These are who define who I am. These are the sort of opportunities for us to speak about what it means to be redeemed. For me personally, redemption involves a redeemer. There has to be somebody that reached out to you. I want to reach out and be a redeemer to others. Obviously, with the work that you've seen here with the AIDS doc, there's opportunity for redemption. So how can we use story to make a difference in people's lives? That's, I guess, one of the things that I'm preoccupied with. I love what, I'll stop rambling here, but in preparation for this talk, I was very intimidated by the resumes up here on the panel, because you've all done some amazing accomplishments, and yet I know that the things that you've done are not, defining of who you are. That who you are is a father or a mother or a husband or wife or a friend. And that's what we see in our film, is a scene in the funeral parlor right before this, where the boys want to know from the caretaker about a guy who died. What did he do that mattered? And the caretaker said, well, you know, at the funeral they didn't talk about, and I've been at a lot of funerals, they don't talk about so much what they did as who they were, how they lived. And that's the kind of thing, being a friend to somebody who doesn't have any friends, reaching out to somebody who needs, that's the kind of thing that could ripple from person to person for a long, long time. That resonates with me, and when I hear truth spoken or shown in a film, I respond to that. So I want to do movies that I think will strike a chord of truth, of authenticity, that will resonate with others. Invariably, like I said, I may be trying to make a difference in your life or an audience's lives. It's usually something the all-powerful is working on with me that I need to learn as much as anything. I find, I don't know if you found that when you're writing a paper, picking a topic, but you think you're doing something good for somebody else, and suddenly the lesson you were hoping to impart is the one that you're the one who needs to learn. And that's why I love telling stories. I find out more about myself, who I am, and the fact that I need redemption, and how to achieve redemption by exploring other people's stories.
And I guess in closing, before we open it up to questions for the audience, in the fictional work that you do, how do you approach storytelling, and what are the crucial elements of what you think will really captivate an audience, a television audience, and how do you work personally through the stories that you tell on television?
Well, I think of redemption too, a lot in terms of second chances too, because we all need a second chance. So I'm very drawn to movies about second chances. Like, my favorite film is Vertigo, because it's really about second chances. And when you get a second chance, and thinking about that. And so I never think about the audience when I'm writing either my television shows, or I just wrote a novel that just came out, and it's about redemption too. It's about a young woman who's a psychiatrist whose best friend was kidnapped when she was 9 years old, and she wonders why it wasn't she who was kidnapped. And when I'm writing for SVU, or now I do a show called A Gifted Man, which just had its last episode, so who knows if it will ever come back, but it was fun to do. I'm thinking often about questions that don't have easy answers, but can engender a lot of discussion. So I'll choose topics that are really tough topics. So for instance, I'll choose a topic on SVU like, and because I'm the writer, I have the power to kind of make it the way I want it, so that it can maybe pull in different points of view. So I'm very interested in multiple points of view. So if I do a show about a mother whose baby has an incurable, we did this actually, an incurable genetic disease called Tay-Sachs, and that child will definitely die, a terrible death, there's no treatment, the child will suffer and die probably by the age of 5, no matter what. then I've put people in a situation where, and then it turns out she euthanized this baby, so she's put on trial. And then I can have my characters really grapple with these issues of, is it ever permissible to euthanize a child who has no chance of survival? And all of the characters, Richard Belzer's character said, no, it's always up to God. And Mariska's character said, well, I don't know if I were a parent. I don't know what I would do. And it gets complicated like life. So I try to find ways to tell complex stories that don't just have, oh, you would do this, or oh, you would do that, because you've all been in circumstances where you don't know what to do. There doesn't seem to be a right answer. There are a lot of whys, like, why is my baby born this way? Why did this happen? And so I try to search through the characters I write for ways of at least getting closer to some truth about it. And that the shows that are most successful, I think, are the ones that don't have any easy answer. They're just ways of kind of going deeper into the questions and really trying to peel back why we think the way we do and why we act the way we do, and try to understand why this mother did what she did, as opposed to just having a gut reaction or a knee-jerk reaction of, oh, she's a bad person. A story can take us much deeper into that person's spiritual journey, really, of why they do what they do. So I'm very lucky to be able to go on these journeys, and I always feel like if the journey is really powerful, then the audience will come along. But I don't really worry about the audience, because then I would be really crazed. Do they like this? Do they like that? But if I have these wow moments, that seems to help. But I always look for questions. I did a show a couple years ago that got a lot of attention with the actress Elizabeth McGovern, who's on Downton Abbey now. And she played a psychiatrist who taught torture techniques to military personnel in Iraq. But I made it much more complicated than, is she a bad person or a good person, because her son was in Iraq, and she talked about the United States being attacked in 9/11, and it got to be a very complex question of, does torture ever work? Are there any times when one should do it? As opposed to, it's wrong, it's right, but how do we think about it? I have my own personal opinions about whether it's wrong or right, but I try to find ways to think through these really complex questions in our lives, and I've been really very, very fortunate to be able to do that.
Well, it seems like the faith, the humanity, is really in the struggle. And that's where we find our humanity, and that's where we find our faith, that faith is not necessarily so much about absolute belief, but it's that constant struggle with what makes us a better person, that makes us dig deeper or reach higher.
I was going to say, I don't know how many writers there are in the room or people interested in writing, but journaling, writing, telling your story, you're working out your salvation with fear and trembling, as it were. And I loved what Neil said about not, if you are a writer, looking at the marketplace saying, gosh, I wonder what will sell, I wonder what's commercial, I wonder what the audience is thinking. That was the kiss of death for me. I went through a long time of trying to predict what would sell in Hollywood. And I read a book, and I think it's a quote, it was called Wild at Heart, but the quote was from a guy named Howard Thurman, who said, don't look around at the world and ask what the world needs. Look inside yourself and ask, what makes me come alive? Because what the world desperately needs are people connected to their passion. And I thought, that's what you've done. That's when you tackle tough topics and you find stuff that make me go, oh, wow, then you're going to resonate with the audience. If you try and please, if you try and predict, if you try and have a relationship with the divine that says, well, I'm going to try and act in a way that you'll fail because it's a fake, it's inauthentic, it's not truthful. When you struggle, when you wrestle, when you really work it out with fear and trembling, you arrive at a place that only God could take you to. It's outside of yourself. It causes you to transcend. I think that's the beauty of being an artist and doing what we get to do, is wrestling, the struggle. It isn't easy. And oftentimes there's like a good story, an apparent defeat. But that's where redemption, and that's why I love what I get to do, is where is the resolution? It's got to be coming from outside of me. I cannot come to the conclusion of what to do in these situations you've put my character in. I used to be an actor. I'd say, how would I deal with this? And that's an amazing journey to be able to sort of say, well, I'm fully connected to my passion because this makes me come alive. So anyway.
Well, let's open it up for questions. And if I could get a little help with the timing, if you can let me know when we have just a few minutes to wrap up. It looks like there are microphones set up. Don't be shy. This is a great opportunity to ask a question about stories and storytelling, and perhaps share with us what you think makes a really compelling story.
Hi, this question is for Neil. I found it really interesting. You said that Vertigo is your favorite movie because it's about a guy who gets a second chance, but correct me if I'm wrong, but he blows that chance. And I want to know, like, where's the redemption in that story, and in other stories where it seems like it ends on a really dark note, like what's going on there, and why are you drawn to that kind of story too?
Well, it reveals a lot about my character liking Vertigo. Because he didn't believe enough and he didn't love her enough. It's just what I do like about it, so he loses her. But you don't have to have a happy ending to have a story about redemption. He did get a second chance, and she reveals herself. Kim Novak's character reveals herself, without giving away the film, reveals herself to him and trusts him, and he feels betrayed and can't let that human quality go, that human emotion go, to forgive her for the betrayal, and loses. So that's what happens in life too. All stories don't have to have happy endings to be about redemption, and that just really moves me, because also I like that film because it raises the question, do we really get a second chance? Now, a lot of the things in this novel I just wrote, she does get a second chance. So it's not like the end of Vertigo, but I think that's what's really powerful about that film, is that he didn't believe enough. Now, there are other films that have much happier endings that are really great films too. So, but that one really just moves me because I really wanted him to forgive her, and he couldn't. So there's a price to pay. So it's really, to me, really fascinating about that's what fascinates me about that film.
And it seems as though forgiveness is such a powerful thing that it's almost impossible to have redemption without an element of forgiveness, either of oneself or of others, in order to make that transformative, redemptive leap.
Right, he couldn't forgive her. He is cured of his vertigo, but big deal, It's like, but it is true, it is about forgiveness, and that's such a hard thing for so many people to go through, to really forgive. So these basic human stories, these basic things we go through, I mean, you all just think about someone you haven't forgiven, and could you write a story about that, and could you write the end of it yet? It's pretty interesting to think. I think about that too. When through Hollywood, you have a lot of it's not easy, and there's a lot of things that go on, and so you have a lot of great experiences, but you might have some less great experiences, and you may be angry at someone, and so is it important to forgive? Is it important to move on? Is it important to carry a grudge? And then these things are really great to write about because they tear you up, and suddenly you're writing about just basic human emotion, and those make great stories.
Well, I read a statement once that I thought is really true, that not holding a grudge and not forgiving is like drinking a glass of poison and waiting for the other person to die.
Exactly.
Anyway, next question.
Thank you very much for showing your films, but also the words that you've shown. I completely agree that story is very important, particularly the stories that we put out to others. I thought that you brought up very good points as far as the stories that we tell our friends, but even the stories that I think that we put out there, whether it be social media or these images or these stories that we kind of present to ourselves. But I think the other flip side of that is the stories that we tell ourselves about our lives or about how we've arrived where we've been or who we are. So in your opinion, do you think that the stories that we put out to the world and the meaning that we hope to attach to that is different than the meaning to the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we even write for ourselves?
Well, there's a lot of dissonance sometimes between the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we put out there. That can cause us a lot of pain. That's why I said earlier that I love giving kids cameras and teaching them to shoot, because it forces them to look at the world in a way they haven't seen before. There's a scene in the film where Alcich says, for the first time he saw the skyline of Mozambique. He never had seen it before because he'd never been above the first floor of a building. And through the camera he saw the world, and he started to see his friends in a different way, and we weren't just orphans, he says that. So seeing through a lens is really powerful, but our own stories are always going through changes too. We're always refining and editing, hopefully, as we grow, and making changes. So what we tell ourselves is always, I think, in flux too. There might be some core elements of our beliefs in social justice, for instance, and that puts us in a certain direction and we act in that way, but sometimes there can be a lot of pain for people who have interior stories that are very different from the exterior stories that they're presenting. And part of growing up is kind of recognizing that, but a lot of people, for various reasons, have a real disconnect between the two because out of fear, I would imagine mostly, or how they'll be judged, who they are. So that's why I love reading novels, or seeing movies, because you get to see someone's interior, especially in novels, you see their interior story because we hear what they're thinking. And we can then bring our own stories to those again and say, wow, maybe I'll be changed. Think about your favorite movie and did it change you, or your favorite novel and did it change you, and did it change the way you're telling your interior story, or does it change the way that you're going to put yourself into the world? One thing I often ask students when I see them, like if I teach at the School of Public Health at USC, and I say, why are you here? And they all look at me like, and I say, you're not here because you decided, I'm going to go to USC School of Public Health, or I'm going to go to the medical school, or whatever. Things happen, stories happen in your lives that directed you there. And oftentimes you write a little bit about it in your applications, but I try to encourage them to think really hard about why they're there. Because they're not bankers, they're not selling real estate, they're in public health. So they have these powerful stories, and I try to ask everyone to think about those stories. I call them private stories. What are those moments in your lives that have really changed your direction, that have made you decide what you want to do when you graduate, the kind of work you want to do? Most of us have really profound events in our lives that have shifted us in some way, and then we have people who've been maybe our parents or people in our lives who've also been beacons that have put us in a direction. But I try to ask people to really think about those moments that have changed their own story.
Just keying off of that too, I think that preparation for tonight really forced me to look at my story. And a good story is not necessarily a happy ending, because you can maintain the disconnect by fooling yourself that I've got a great life. I became rich and famous, and I'm a great success, and I've got Oscars and all this stuff, and you never really deal with the person in the mirror. The worst thing that ever happened to me, and there's been a couple of really bad things, but every time I had a major failure, it led to an epiphany, a self-revelation that revealed to me in all that naked failure who I am and how empty I am and how short I've fallen, and yet I got a second chance. When I look back at my life, I can go, oh my gosh, there was a eucatastrophe, a positive spin, something amazing that came out of this that I couldn't see at the time. And not always do you get that in this life, but that's why I like Snowmen. This life is not all there is to me. We're not just here for a minute and then we're a pile of water. We go on. And I think there's the defining moments in my life have been when things were the darkest, when I got fired and thought I would never work in film again. A company I'd made 15 movies for, and they say, you're done. And we're not happy, and you will never work with us again. And you think, and then you get on a plane and you fly home after being fired to tell your family, we're all going home. Movie's done, and I'll probably never work again, and the plane has an engine go out. And suddenly, as you're on that plane, you say, the movie really doesn't matter. If I never do another film again, I don't really care. It's like him underwater. It's like none of that world records, it doesn't matter anymore. The only thing I realized is I stopped asking you, God, to save me, and just, I'm sorry for how I messed it all up. Out of that, when somebody redeems you or pulls you out or saves you, as this kid happened to him, you live with such a changed attitude of gratitude that you have to share that story with others who are in that point that they haven't had that yet. But you say, you know what, we don't, right now it's a mirror dimly, but there's hope. And giving those kids those cameras, giving this filmmaker, our director, a script and a budget to make his story, just me sitting and telling you today allows me to work out and let you know, because maybe there's somebody that speaks to tonight that needs to hear that it ain't over. It ain't over till it's over. And we tend to believe sometimes the lies we've told ourselves and the lies that we buy into and the lies that the media and advertising and movies sometimes tell us about who we are or what we're not. And the good thing about it is hopefully it creates an emptiness in us where we start seeking for more.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to realize that everything that you know about yourself comes from a story someone else has told you or a story you've told yourself. And if you want to change who you are, you have to change the story. Yes?
Yeah, we have a question from the text-in question line, which the number is on your programs in case you guys want to do that. Seems like people are a little embarrassed to get up to the mic. Here's the question. It's kind of long, so bear with me. In the new Invisible Children campaign film about Joseph Kony, which is going viral on Facebook right now. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Not Facebook, the video. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It is a very compelling and touching story that is able to resonate and compel people to take action. But there are some rumored numbers that only 30% of the funds go towards the actual campaign, and the rest goes towards administration of the NGO. How are you supposed to reconcile such a great, compelling story with the fact that this nonprofit organization may not be of a completely pure motive? And in answering that, I would love to hear from both of the, well, you're all filmmakers, but from Neil and John and Lori, if you want to weigh in on this, why do you do what you do? What motivates you to tell these stories? You know, this story from the AIDS orphan in Mozambique. What motivates you to tell stories of redemption to society? So there's a lot in there. But yeah.
By way of disclaimer, so Machine Gun Preacher is the movie, I'm thinking, and our company is a producer on that project, so I have to, by way of disclaimer, just say, I didn't know we were getting 70% of the money for, no, I'm kidding. That's disturbing to hear that there might be some controversy about where the funds go, because the reason that we got involved in that movie and the reason that Sam Childers wanted his story told and the reason that it's a redemptive tale is a Harley-Davidson riding, gangbanger, barroom brawling, bad dude went over to Africa, saw a kid step on a landmine, and it changed his life. And he came to us, some producer brought him, they wanted his story told, and we said, write the book first, tell your story. Let's see it all out there, let's do the research. And they did, and immediately got a director and Gerard Butler to star in it, and suddenly it's a major feature film. The reason for us to make that story, the reason I want it out there, is so that the kids in the Sudan will be helped, that the filmmaker will be empowered and the audience will be empowered to make change. If you read online that 30% of funds donated are going to overhead and administrative costs, I wouldn't give to that charity, and you can research that. But does that excuse us from getting involved? I think film is an excellent motivator, call to action, opportunity to make a difference in social causes. So I'll just shut up on that, but that's my initial reaction is, doesn't mean we shouldn't get involved. Don't allow that to excuse us from giving or texting or making other people aware of the problem with Joseph Kony and what's happening in Sudan and Uganda.
I think it's important to hold NGOs, responsible for how they spend the money, and it's really important to look and read the fine print about how much goes to administration versus how much goes to the actual project, and then make the decisions that way. So that was one part of the question. The other part was, so why did I choose? Well, I'm a pediatrician, so I'm really interested in children's health. Why am I a pediatrician? Well, that's a long story, It's who I am and how I was influenced, and my father was a doctor, and so there are a lot of things that go into that. But I think really, it's so funny because somebody asked me this question today, and I think the easiest or the best way for me to answer it, sort of in a short way, is that when I was a graduate student, I read a book by a philosopher, and I got to go to his course actually, named John Rawls, and he wrote a book called Theory of Justice, and he passed away a few years ago, and that really had a profound influence on me because he wrote about social justice issues, and so I use that lens a lot, and I get into arguments and sometimes fights with people, over these issues about social justice, but it gives me sort of a guide through which to sort of kind of understand the world, and so it's a way it sort of has become a part of me. So I think a lot about social justice issues, and that kids in Africa don't choose to be born, HIV positive, the ones who are, or to have their parents die of AIDS. So since they didn't choose that, what's the just thing to do, and how do we deal with that as human beings, as opposed to, do we charge them a lot of money for antiretrovirals? Because in the United States, fortunately, everybody can get them still for the most part, and we'll pay for them, but you can't in Africa. So is that fair, or should we be speaking about that? The other thing I want to say is that I also really love listening to people's stories. So as a physician, I've been really privileged to hear lots of stories, very deep, emotional, sometimes horribly distressing, sometimes really hopeful, sometimes really sad if you're taking care of someone who's going to die and there's nothing you can do except hear their story. It's very powerful to listen to someone's story. You've probably been in that situation where you've had a friend or a loved one who's shared their story with you and how much it helps that person. So that's something that we should try to do more, because it's very healing to listen to a person's story. When that person tells you the story, it empowers them. It means I mean something. So you don't have to be a doctor to be doing it. There are lots of ways to do it. But I think that guides me as well in why I went to Maputo and why I went to South Africa or to other countries to hear those stories.
I think also too, just talking about how powerful it is to listen to people's stories and to encourage them to tell their stories, whatever those stories are, is all you have to do is look at the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, where people who had been active and a part of the whole apartheid process got up and told their stories, and by admitting their truth and by claiming what they did was really a tremendous part of the healing process in South Africa. And all it did, that whole process was just about sharing stories, listening to stories, and telling stories in return. So that's how very, very powerful the process is.
It's happening in Rwanda, it's happening in Sierra Leone, where terrible things have happened, and there's reparations and forgiveness. And a lot of times in the United States, we have trouble dealing with that and say, take everybody to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And there's a real cultural difference, because there's a lot of storytelling, as you just said, going on, where they may not want to take people to the International Criminal Court, but the healing process may be through the storytelling. So there's some really interesting movies that have come out recently about this, and it's kind of clashing with many times the way we look at justice, but it's worth thinking about.
One more question, sorry.
You both have talked about the importance of passion and making people feel that a story is real and connecting to a story, and the issue of faith has been brought up briefly. Can you both speak to how your faith maybe has influenced you as a producer, as an actor, as a filmmaker, and then on the flip side, how being a storyteller has also influenced your faith?
I have to think for a second about both.
Well, I'll start by saying, having come, you heard a brief bit of my testimony, which was I started it coming out here as an actor, and the first film I get is Friday the 13th. And you've got gifts or certain tools, and you come out and you want to use them for good, and someone says, the biggest franchise ever, and you get to kill Jason. I sort of feel like somebody had been given this really incredible gift, and I was using it to take the trash out. This beautiful leather briefcase, and I'm taking out the garbage. Not that there's anything, wrong with doing a Friday the 13th, but it wasn't the highest calling that I aspired to coming here to Los Angeles. And so I actually had to make a choice. Am I going to make, my character lives, I go on to part 6. And I had to really decide, is this what it's about? Is this what I studied, and is this what I want to do? Is this the legacy I want to leave? And I made a conscious choice because of my faith, really, to say, you know what, I'm going to say no. And I got out of the business, and I went to seminary, because I thought, I guess I have to be a missionary or a pastor or sequestered somehow from the world, because I just don't see how can you, what can you do for good if you have a faith in this business. While I'm at seminary, I'm going to dating a girl, and we would meet at church on Sunday, because it was halfway between us geographically and theologically. And because you know what it's like when you're dating somebody, and you're a Christian and trying to be a good guy, but she's absolutely gorgeous. And so we would meet at church where it was safe, and a guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, I just read for a movie. You're an actor, right?" And I said, "No, used to be. I'm going to seminary." He goes, No, you're an actor. You should read for this movie." Long story short, I got the role. I go to Amsterdam for the summer. They fly my girlfriend over. We got engaged. We've been married 20 plus years now. Unbelievable. Now, that wasn't my design, all right? And I can count to numerous times where huge setbacks in my life, failures, being fired, losing children, all kinds of things that have happened to us, tragedies in our lives. I believe that when I look back, there's a design to it. And so how has it infected or infused my faith? It has caused me to realize it's not about me. In Hollywood, all about you. Life is all about you. All about me, not about you. I had this change. It's not about me. And once I realized it's not about me, I was able to actually transcend this whole thing about having to be successful or rich or famous. Realize those things don't satisfy. What satisfies is my ability to impact others, my relationship with God. And in that came satisfaction, peace, and security that I didn't have in all those other successes, quote unquote, that don't mean a hill of beans 5 years from now, let alone 50 years from now. So that's the short answer of how faith has influenced my choices, and then how my choices have since caused me to grow in my faith.
So, I think that I have faith in humanity that they will find the right way, even though we're living in such, for me, just the toughest times ever in my life. And so I'm much older than you are, so I can't remember a time that was so complex with social media and all the choices. When we were in college, we just had paper and pens and a typewriter, and that was it. And we didn't have all of these competing things going on. And it was a quieter time. And we didn't have science that had evolved to the point where it could wipe out. Well, I guess we did. We had nuclear bombs when, before I was born. But now we have all kinds of biological ways to destroy humanity too. So I think a lot about how can storytelling, which I think, as I said at the very beginning, is sort of the basic way we relate to each other, how can storytelling connect us in a way so that we don't make some tragic mistakes, so that we kind of try to understand each other better. So I have faith in human beings in that their nature is such that they can connect if given a chance. And so I don't give up on telling stories. And then I think that storytelling then increases my faith in hope for the future, because I see these stories that really move me and they move other people, and I see that storytelling can promote social change, and they can promote understanding, and they can promote ways of seeing the world, as others do. And it can be any kind of story. They can be parables, or they can be real stories now. But so it's it's sort of circular for me, but I do have this abiding faith in people connecting with each other, and we're so fortunate to have stories. But these are really tough times, if you just watch the news or listen to the radio today about Iran, for instance. It's like, is there a way for us to tell stories so that we don't just have knee-jerk reactions like, they're bad, this is good. But how do we use stories to connect more with one another so that we don't, blow each other up? And I think that's like one of the basic tools that we have. And we use it, be it in a church or a synagogue or in a mosque. They're basic stories that we have told through the millennia, and we really need now to tell stories more than ever, I think, to each other and listen to each other's stories too. That's the other really important stuff. We just can't tell our own story, but we have to really be open to hear other stories too.
Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. And I would like to leave you with one final thought, and that is that storytellers are the most powerful people on earth. They are not necessarily the best paid, but they are the most powerful, because storytellers have the power to move the human heart, and there is no greater power on earth. Thank you very much.
That's lovely.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.